Frog and Toad, Storybook Favorites by Arnold Lobel. The story. One day, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I am a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of tea, and Frog drank the tea, and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. "I will go out on the front porch. I will walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that'll help me think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope if I stand on my head, it will help me think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water on his head. "Why are you pouring water on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "Well, I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. "I am feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I don't think I need a story anymore." "Well, then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." Once upon a time, there were two good friends, a frog and a toad, and the frog was not feeling well and asked his friend to tell him a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he could not think of a story. Then when Toad did not feel well, Frog was feeling better, so Toad went to bed, and Frog got up and told him a story at the end. "Now what do you think of that, Toad?" said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Poor Toad. Do you think that's the way to think of a story? Banging your head, pouring water on your head? That only gives you a headache. The way to think of a story is to think and think.